This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What you are watching is quieter than that and far more dangerous because something fundamental has shifted, not loudly, not all at once, but decisively. A system that once relied on continuity now runs on interruption. A system that depended on patience now rewards speed. And a system that was built on time is being forced to operate without it. Nothing here collapses immediately. That's the trick. The damage doesn't look like failure. It looks like efficiency. Decisions are made fast. Outcomes appear decisive. Markets react. Power moves. And yet, underneath all of it, something essential stops working. Quietly. Almost politely. If you stay with me, you'll see why this isn't a story about what was taken. It's a story about what can no longer be trusted. And once trust breaks, it doesn't announce itself. It spreads. So hold that thought, because to understand what's happening now, you first have to understand what actually controls the system today. For a long time, we told ourselves that power lived in people. Presidents, leaders, strong personalities making strong decisions. That story is comforting. It gives chaos a face. But that's no longer how the system actually works. What controls outcomes now is not who gives the order. It's who believes the order will still matter tomorrow. Because modern power doesn't come from force alone. It comes from credibility stretched over time. Capital doesn't respond to speeches. It responds to predictability, to rules that survive elections, to contracts that outlive moods. And when that continuity breaks, the system doesn't revolt. It hesitates. You can remove obstacles overnight. You can clear leaders from the board. You can even redirect enormous flows of money in the short term. But you cannot command belief. You cannot order patience. And you cannot force long-term commitment at the point of a decision. That's the gap opening now between what can be taken quickly and what can only exist slowly. And once that gap opens, everything downstream begins to behave strangely, which brings us to the shift almost everyone missed. For decades, the system ran on an assumption so stable we stopped naming it, that tomorrow would mostly resemble today, not identical, but close enough to plan around. Before, change arrived with warning. Negotiations took time, rules bent slowly. Even disruption followed a schedule. Now compare that to what normal looks like. Decisions arrive without notice. Policies reverse midstream. Agreements expire without being broken, simply ignored. Nothing announces the transition. There's no ceremony for this kind of shift. It just becomes familiar. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because the most destabilizing change isn't sudden collapse. It's adaptation. It's when institutions quietly rewire themselves to survive uncertainty. They shorten their timelines. They delay commitments. They wait. From the outside, everything still appears functional. Money still moves. Orders still get signed. Announcements still sound confident. But underneath, the clock that made the system work is no longer trusted. And once time itself becomes unreliable, the next shock doesn't need to be large. It just needs to arrive, which is exactly what happened next. Then came the moment that looked like proof. A single move, fast, decisive. A leader removed, control asserted, revenue streams frozen and rerouted. On paper, it worked. Markets reacted immediately. Stock prices surged. Confidence, at least the visible kind, spiked. From the outside, this looked like mastery, like the system responding exactly as commanded. But that reaction was the symptom, not the signal. Because what moved first wasn't investment. It was speculation. Money that lives in the moment. Money that can enter and exit without consequence. What did not move was commitment. Behind closed doors, the response was very different. Not defiance, not resistance, silence. Carefully worded agreements that promised attention, not action. Optimism without timelines. interest without obligation, everyone understood what had just been demonstrated. Not stability, not safety, but how quickly the rules could be rewritten. And once that becomes clear, the real question isn't whether power can act, it's whether anyone will follow it for long. If this already feels unsettling, stay with me, because the reason isn't political, it's structural. Here's the part that's easy to miss if you're watching from the outside. The system didn't freeze because companies were afraid. It froze because the math stopped working. Long-term investment isn't a reaction. It's a bet placed years in advance. You spend first. You absorb risk first. You wait. And the only thing that makes that tolerable is confidence that the rules won't change halfway through the wait. But when power demonstrates it can nullify agreements instantly, tear up contracts, replace counterparties, redefine legitimacy, it doesn't just punish the target. It teaches everyone else a lesson, that today's deal is provisional, that tomorrow's authority may disagree. That success now paints a target later. So the beneficiaries aren't the builders, they're the intermediaries. Traders who move fast, speculators who exit early, actors who never need to stay. The damage doesn't land on balance sheets immediately. It accumulates quietly in deferred projects, in delayed maintenance, in capacity that never gets rebuilt. This is how systems hollow out without collapsing. And once you see it, you can't unsee what comes next. Because the system doesn't pause here. It accelerates. Then the second shock hit, not louder, faster. Deadlines appeared, expectations hardened, timelines compressed. Act now. Decide now. Commit now, but long-term systems don't speed up when pressured. They shut down. Boards asked one question, then stopped. What happens if this reverses? No one needed to say it out loud. Everyone knew the answer. Tweets became policy. Policy became temporary. Temporary became permanent. Risk models broke. Legal frameworks lagged. Insurance stopped pricing certainty. Every calculation now included a variable that could not be measured. Mood. And when mood enters the system, discipline leaves it. So companies stalled. Quietly, politely, they said yes in public. They did nothing in private. This wasn't sabotage. It was survival. Because once capital learns that tomorrow may invalidate today, the only rational move is to wait. And waiting at scale looks exactly like confidence until suddenly it doesn't. Hold on to that. Because this is the moment the damage reaches people who never signed a contract. Here's where this stops being abstract. Because when systems stop trusting time, they don't fail at the top. They fail where you live. You don't see the canceled projects. You see the jobs that never open, the repairs that never happen, the price increases that arrive without explanation. You're told it's temporary. You're told to be patient. You're told the system is working. But patience only works when someone believes tomorrow is coming. When investment pauses, wages stagnate. When maintenance is delayed, outages increase. When capacity isn't rebuilt, shortages become normal. And none of this feels dramatic. That's the cruelty of it. There's no single moment to point to. No announcement, no vote. Just a quiet narrowing of options. If this sounds familiar, it's because you're already inside it. And here's the part no one likes to say out loud. Once this dynamic starts, it doesn't reverse quickly. It either stabilizes or it spreads. So stay with me. Because this isn't contained to one place or one sector or one country. Once this logic escapes its origin, it doesn't travel alone. Other governments watch carefully. Not the speeches, the consequences. They see what happens when agreements are rewritten overnight. They notice which actions are rewarded and which risks are absorbed quietly by someone else. So they adjust, contracts get shorter, exit clauses multiply. Redundancy replaces commitment. Alliances become conditional. Partnerships become transactional. Trust becomes provisional. And this doesn't announce itself as conflict. It looks like prudence, supply chains fragment, financing costs rise, insurance spreads thin. Everyone starts preparing for a future that may invalidate the present. The system still functions. That's what makes this phase deceptive. Ships still move. Money still clears. Deals still get signed, but fewer of them are meant to last. And when durability disappears from enough places at once, you don't get a crisis. You get drift. A world that feels less reliable each year without any single moment you can blame, which brings us to the question no one wants to answer yet. What happens next? From here, the system has three possible paths. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. Institutions relearn restraint. Rules slow down decision-making again. Credibility is rebuilt carefully over time. This path is quiet and slow. It requires accepting limits on power. The second path is erosion. Nothing breaks outright. But timelines shrink. Risk premiums rise. Maintenance is deferred again and again. The system keeps functioning, just less well, each year a little thinner than the last. People adapt. Expectations lower. Instability becomes background noise. Then there is the third path, rupture. This is what happens when too many actors stop believing at once. When waiting turns into withdrawal. When hesitation becomes exit. It doesn't arrive as collapse. It arrives as refusal. Projects abandoned. Capital pulled. Promises unenforced. And when that happens, power discovers something uncomfortable. Force can seize assets, but it cannot compel participation. Which path we take is not decided yet, but the conditions for all three are already in place. And that leaves one final question. If you're waiting for a moment when this becomes obvious, you may be waiting too long. Because systems like this don't fail loudly. They fail by becoming unrecognizable. By the time people agree something is wrong, the rules that made repair possible are already gone. What you've been watching isn't a power grab. It's a credibility drain, a slow leak in the idea that tomorrow will honor today. And once that belief disappears, rebuilding it is harder than seizing anything ever was. This isn't a warning about one leader or one country or one moment. It's about a precedent that doesn't stay contained. If you want to understand where this goes next, how systems behave when time itself becomes unreliable, that's the conversation we're going to keep having. Because the danger here isn't what's already happened. It's what this teaches the system to expect. And expectations, once set, are very hard to undo. If you stop here, you miss the part that hasn't happened yet. And that part is coming. Stay with me.